At my husband's office Christmas party, his mother introduced his 21-year-old intern as his future wife to his entire company. "She's everything his current wife isn't: young, smart, and childless," she announced. The CEO laughed as they toasted, until I revealed the intern's true identity, and one toast that night cost them everything. "She's young, smart, and childless, everything Matthew needs in a partner," Cynthia, my mother-in-law, declared to the packed Christmas party, her arm wrapped around Sandra like she'd found the perfect daughter-in-law. The entire executive team stood frozen with their drinks halfway to their lips, watching this family drama unfold in real time. I felt my knees buckle as Matthew stepped forward to embrace Sandra, accepting congratulations from colleagues who'd worked with me for 5 years. They were celebrating my husband's engagement to another woman while I stood there like a ghost at my own funeral. But as I watched this nightmare unfold before me, my mind raced backward through the months of warning signs I'd been too blind to see clearly. Every suspicious moment, every strange behavior, every red flag I'd rationalized away now crystallized into perfect, devastating clarity. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories about women who refuse to be silently discarded. If you believe that marriage vows should mean something and that betrayal deserves consequences, please consider subscribing. It helps us reach more women who need to hear this. The signs had been building since early fall, subtle at first but growing more obvious with each passing week. It started with Matthew's work schedule becoming erratic in ways that defied explanation. He'd always been dedicated to his career, but this change felt different, more secretive, more personal. He began staying at the office until 9 or 10 at night, claiming urgent projects that somehow never appeared in any quarterly reports or company communications I had access to. When I'd offer to pack him dinner for these late nights, he'd wave me off dismissively. "Already ordered something with the team," he'd say, though when I called the office after hours to check on him, the night security guard would tell me the building had been mostly empty since 6:30. The contradictions were glaring, but I convinced myself there must be reasonable explanations I simply wasn't seeing. His personal habits shifted in ways that made my skin crawl with unease. Matthew started showering immediately after coming home, even on days when he claimed to have been sitting in air-conditioned conference rooms all evening. His cologne became heavier, more expensive, like he was trying to mask scents that didn't belong in a corporate office. He switched aftershaves too, abandoning the familiar woody scent I'd bought him for Christmas in favor of something citrusy and aggressive that made our bedrooms smell foreign. The phone became his constant companion, never leaving his sight even during our most intimate moments. He'd take it to the bathroom, keep it face down during dinner conversations, and sleep with it under his pillow instead of on the nightstand where it had rested for 5 years of marriage. When it buzzed during movies or quiet evenings together, he'd glance at the screen with an expression I'd never seen before, excitement mixed with guilt that made my stomach turn with dread. Our credit card statements began telling a story I was too frightened to read properly at first. Expensive restaurants appeared with increasing frequency, places like Bella Vista, the Garden Terrace, and Moonlight Bistro, establishments known for romantic ambience rather than business networking. When I'd ask about these charges, Matthew would spin elaborate tales about client entertainment and industry networking events, but the timing never aligned with his stated schedule. The receipts showed intimate dinners for 2 at 8:30 on nights when Matthew claimed to be in budget meetings that officially ended at 5 o'clock. The restaurants he was visiting specialized in couples dining, with candlelit tables and wine pairings designed for romantic evenings rather than professional discussions. I began secretly photographing each statement before Matthew could review them, building a collection of evidence I wasn't ready to confront. Jewelry purchases started appearing monthly, small amounts individually, but forming a damning pattern when viewed collectively. Delicate gold earrings from Meridian Jewelers. A silver bracelet from Crown and Company. Pearl earrings from Prestige Gems. When I searched our house thoroughly, thinking perhaps Matthew was planning surprise gifts for our anniversary or upcoming holidays, I found nothing new in my jewelry collection. These beautiful, expensive items were going somewhere else, to someone else who was receiving the romantic gestures I'd stopped getting months ago. Hotel charges became the most devastating evidence, though I desperately tried to rationalize them away. The Metropolitan Hotel appeared regularly, executive suites booked for multiple nights during periods when Matthew claimed to be attending crucial business conferences. When I'd call the hotel's events coordinator to ask about conference details, pretending I was trying to coordinate my own schedule around his travel, they had no record of any corporate events during those dates. The luxury suites were being booked under Matthew's personal name for what were clearly romantic getaways with someone who definitely wasn't his wife. The room service charges, spa treatments, and late-night champagne deliveries painted a picture of intimate weekends that made me physically ill to imagine. Cynthia's sudden increased involvement in our marriage should have been the clearest warning sign of all. She'd never fully approved of me, but her disapproval had always been manageable through polite distance and superficial pleasantries. Recently, her approach became strategic and purposeful in ways that felt like a coordinated campaign against our relationship. She began arriving for unannounced visits when she knew I'd be at work, spending hours alone with Matthew discussing topics they'd immediately stop talking about the moment I came home. During family dinners, Cynthia started making pointed observations about marriages requiring growth and adaptation to survive modern pressures. She'd mention other couples who'd made difficult but necessary changes to find happiness, her eyes fixed on me during these supposedly casual comments. Her remarks about my career became sharper and more frequent, suggesting that working women sometimes lost touch with their feminine instincts and family priorities. When I'd try to engage Matthew in conversations about our future plans, vacations we might take, renovations we discussed, or even simple weekend activities, Cynthia would interject with opinions about young people being too quick to settle for comfortable rather than pursuing their authentic dreams. The most disturbing change was in Matthew's treatment of me. The man who'd once sought my opinion on everything from his clothing choices to major business decisions suddenly acted like my thoughts were irrelevant background noise. He'd make significant plans without consulting me, change our social commitments without explanation, and dismiss my concerns about his behavior with patronizing reassurances that I was overthinking things or being too sensitive. Our physical relationship became mechanical and distant, like he was fulfilling marital obligations rather than expressing genuine affection. He'd turn away immediately afterward, reaching for his phone instead of holding me the way he used to. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the ceiling with profound dissatisfaction, like he was trapped in a life that no longer brought him joy. The final piece of devastating evidence came just 2 weeks before tonight's Christmas party. Matthew had left his laptop open on our kitchen table while he showered, displaying an email thread that shattered what remained of my denial. The messages were from someone named Sandra Morrison, discussing meeting arrangements with an intimacy that went far beyond any professional correspondence I'd ever seen. She'd written about missing him during his recent business trip to Chicago, mentioning specific details about his hotel room and their dinner plans that proved she'd been there with him. Her messages referenced inside jokes, shared experiences, and future plans that revealed a relationship that had been developing for months while I'd been obliviously playing the role of devoted wife. Now, standing in this ballroom watching Matthew accept congratulations on his engagement to this Sandra Morrison, I finally understood that every warning sign had been leading to this moment of public humiliation. The months of suspicious behavior, unexplained expenses, and emotional distance had all been building toward tonight's devastating revelation. But what I didn't yet realize was that Sandra Morrison's arrival in our lives had been far more calculated than a simple office romance, and the true scope of deception was about to unfold in ways I never could have imagined. That Sandra Morrison had been no ordinary intern became devastatingly clear as I stood watching Matthew celebrate his engagement to her. But to understand how she'd infiltrated our lives so completely, I needed to remember that first day she'd walked into our office building, the day everything began unraveling without me realizing it. It was a Tuesday morning in early September when I first laid eyes on her. I'd been delivering quarterly reports to Linda, Matthew's assistant, when this stunning young woman glided through the reception area like she was walking a red carpet rather than entering a corporate office. Her auburn hair caught the morning sunlight streaming through our floor-to-ceiling windows, and her tailored navy dress fit her perfectly, the kind of expensive outfit that should have been my first clue that something wasn't right about this supposed intern. Every conversation in the lobby seemed to pause as she passed. Men stopped mid-sentence to stare, their coffee cups frozen halfway to their lips. Even the security guard straightened up behind his desk, suddenly very interested in appearing professional. Sandra moved with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're the most captivating person in any room, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that seemed almost musical. "Who is that?" Linda whispered, though her tone suggested she already sensed this woman would be significant. Within minutes, Matthew had emerged from his office, practically radiating excitement. His entire posture had changed: straighter shoulders, brighter smile, animated energy that I hadn't seen from him in months. "Ashley," he called across the reception area, his voice carrying enthusiasm that made my chest tighten with unease. "Come meet our new intern, Sandra Morrison." Morrison. The name should have registered immediately, should have connected to Walter Morrison, our company's biggest shareholder. But I was too focused on the way Matthew's whole demeanor had transformed in this woman's presence to process the significance of her surname. Sandra extended her hand with practiced grace, her grip firm and confident in a way that felt rehearsed rather than natural. "Ashley, such a pleasure," she said, her voice warm enough to seem friendly while her emerald eyes studied my face with uncomfortable intensity. "Matthew has shared so much about you." The comment struck me as odd because Matthew rarely discussed personal details about our marriage with colleagues. When I glanced at him, his expression carried the guilty flush of someone who'd revealed more than he should have. His face told me he'd been sharing intimate details about our relationship with this woman he'd supposedly just met. "Sandra graduated from Northwestern with dual degrees in business and finance," Matthew explained, his hand hovering near her elbow in a gesture that felt inappropriately intimate for a professional introduction. "She'll be working directly with our executive team on some specialized projects." Specialized projects. In my 15 years of corporate experience, I'd never heard of an intern being assigned to executive-level work on their first day. Internships typically involved basic administrative tasks, data entry, and learning fundamental business processes. They didn't come with immediate access to senior management and confidential company operations. Over the following days, Sandra's presence became impossible to ignore. Her workspace was positioned in the executive wing, directly adjacent to Matthew's office with clear sight lines to every important meeting room in the building. Her computer setup included dual monitors and software access that most employees didn't receive until their second year with the company. The IT department had somehow fast-tracked her security clearances and system permissions in ways that defied standard protocol. Margaret from accounting was the first to voice what everyone was thinking during our Thursday morning coffee ritual. "Something feels off about that new girl," she said, checking around the break room to ensure we weren't being overheard. "Yesterday she requested comprehensive budget reports covering the last 3 years. Asking specific questions about expense classifications and vendor relationships that sound more like an internal audit than typical intern curiosity." I'd noticed the same thing during our monthly department meeting. While other interns sat quietly absorbing information, Sandra asked pointed questions about cost allocation methods, revenue recognition practices, and financial reporting standards that revealed sophisticated understanding of corporate accounting. Her inquiries weren't broad learning-focused questions you'd expect from someone new to the business world. They were targeted investigations suggesting she was searching for something specific. "She's requesting access to confidential files that require department head authorization," Margaret continued, her voice dropping to a concerned whisper. "But somehow she's getting approval for everything." Linda mentioned that Matthew personally signed off on clearance levels that took me 3 years to earn. The morning coffee ritual became the most painful part of my daily routine. Every day at precisely 8:15, Matthew would walk through the office carrying 2 cups from the expensive coffee shop across the street, his usual black coffee and an elaborate drink that hadn't existed in his routine until Sandra's arrival. A vanilla cinnamon latte with oat milk and extra foam that cost more than most people spent on lunch. He'd deliver this overpriced beverage to Sandra's desk with attention and care he used to reserve for special occasions with me. I'd watch from my position near the copy machine as he lingered by her workspace, engaging in animated conversations that made both of them laugh with genuine enjoyment. Their body language during these interactions was unmistakably flirtatious. Sandra would lean forward when speaking, Matthew would find excuses to touch her shoulder or gesture near her hand, and both maintained eye contact longer than professional courtesy required. The meetings became even more disturbing to witness. Matthew began including Sandra in executive discussions that had nothing to do with typical internship responsibilities. She'd sit at the conference table with senior management, contributing insights and observations that suggested she understood our company's operations better than employees who'd worked there for years. During presentations, Matthew would defer to her opinion even when it contradicted recommendations from more experienced team members. "What's your perspective on this, Sandra?" became his standard response to complex business questions, as if a recent college graduate's viewpoint carried more weight than the combined experience of his senior staff. Other executives started exchanging confused glances during these meetings, clearly wondering why an intern was being treated like a high-level consultant. Janet from HR mentioned during one of our casual conversations that Matthew had specifically requested Sandra be assigned to every project he oversaw, regardless of whether it related to her supposed learning objectives. "It's unusual," Janet confided. "Most managers want interns rotating through different departments to gain broad experience. Matthew seems determined to keep her exclusively within his sphere of influence." The transformation in Matthew's behavior around Sandra was embarrassing to witness. He'd light up whenever she entered a room, his face brightening like he'd just received unexpected good news. During team meetings, his voice would soften when addressing her, taking on an almost protective tone that made my skin crawl with recognition. I'd seen that expression before. It was how he'd looked at me during our early dating years, when everything I said seemed fascinating and every smile I gave him felt like a precious gift. Other employees began noticing the obvious favoritism. I'd overhear whispered conversations about Matthew's special interest in the new intern, speculation about whether their relationship extended beyond professional mentorship. The gossip was uncomfortable but not entirely surprising. Sandra's rapid integration into executive operations and Matthew's obvious infatuation with her had created an office dynamic that felt charged with inappropriate tension. What disturbed me most was how quickly Sandra had gained access to information about our personal lives. Through Matthew, she learned details about my background, my preferences, my daily routines that no colleague should know. Her questions, filtered through my husband, felt like intelligence gathering disguised as friendly curiosity about his family life. "Sandra was wondering about your accounting experience," Matthew would mention during dinner. "She's impressed that you studied finance and asked if you missed working in that field." Another evening, "Sandra noticed you don't wear much jewelry and wondered if that reflects your personal style or if I haven't been sufficiently romantic." Each inquiry revealed that Sandra was paying uncomfortably close attention to aspects of my personal life, gathering information that felt strategic rather than casually interested. Through Matthew's unwitting cooperation, she learned that I valued privacy over social activities, that I'd been disappointed by our inability to have children, and that I'd gradually become isolated from college friends after marriage. Standing in that ballroom months later, watching Sandra accept congratulations on her engagement to my husband, I finally understood what I'd been witnessing during those early weeks. She hadn't arrived as a genuine intern seeking professional development. She'd come with a specific mission, and I'd been too trusting to recognize that destroying my marriage was apparently part of her assignment. The systematic destruction of my marriage didn't happen overnight. What I witnessed over the following weeks was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation that revealed Sandra's true expertise wasn't in business administration. It was in human psychology and strategic deception. Her approach to Matthew was surgically precise in its execution. Every afternoon at exactly 3:30, she'd appear at his office door carrying documents that somehow always required his immediate expertise. The timing was deliberate, during the post-lunch energy dip when his defenses were lowest, never when other executives might witness their interactions. "I'm struggling to understand these profit projections," she'd say, her voice carrying just enough confusion to make Matthew feel indispensable while her intelligent eyes suggested she grasped the numbers better than most senior analysts. She'd lean across his desk to point at specific figures, her expensive perfume filling the office space and lingering long after she departed. I'd watch these performances through the glass partition separating Matthew's office from the main workspace, my stomach churning as Sandra executed her daily theater of helplessness. She'd tilt her head at precisely the right angle to catch the afternoon light streaming through his windows, making her auburn hair shimmer as she listened to his explanations with theatrical fascination. Her note-taking was elaborate and unnecessary, as if his every word deserved preservation for future reference. "Matthew is such a brilliant mentor," she'd announced to nearby colleagues within his earshot, her voice carrying clearly across the office floor. "I'm learning more from him in 1 week than I did in 4 years of business school. He has this gift for making complex concepts seem effortless." The flattery was calculated and relentless. designed to make Matthew feel like an exceptional teacher rather than a married man being seduced by someone young enough to be his daughter. Sandra's questions revealed sophisticated understanding of corporate finance that contradicted her supposed need for basic instruction, but Matthew was too intoxicated by her attention to notice the contradiction. Her conquest of Cynthia was even more impressive in its thoroughness and strategic planning. During that second family dinner, Sandra arrived with white roses, Cynthia's favorite flowers, information I'd never shared with anyone at Matthew's workplace. She complimented the floral centerpiece with genuine-seeming appreciation while asking detailed questions about gardening techniques that revealed extensive research into my mother-in-law's hobbies. "These dahlias are absolutely magnificent," Sandra said, examining Cynthia's prized blooms with the reverence of a devoted student. "I've been attempting to cultivate them in my apartment, but I can't achieve the right soil conditions. Do you think pH balance might be the issue?" Cynthia practically glowed with pleasure at discovering someone who shared her passion for horticulture. For 45 minutes she explained soil composition, fertilization schedules, and pest management while Sandra absorbed every word with the devotion of a disciple learning from a master. I sat there realizing Sandra had identified the fastest route to Cynthia's affections, through her garden and her desperate need to feel valuable and respected. "You should visit this weekend," Cynthia offered spontaneously. "I could show you my greenhouse setup and provide some dahlia bulbs for you to try in properly prepared soil." Sandra's acceptance was gracious and enthusiastic, establishing a relationship that effectively circumvented me entirely. Within weeks she was visiting Cynthia twice weekly, assisting with garden maintenance while engaging in conversations about traditional family values, proper marriage dynamics, and the importance of finding partners who appreciated domestic stability over career ambition. The coffee break intelligence gathering was where Sandra demonstrated her most sophisticated psychological manipulation skills. She timed these encounters to coincide with Matthew's moments of maximum vulnerability, immediately after challenging board meetings, before major presentations, during periods when quarterly numbers weren't meeting projected targets. Her approach appeared spontaneous but was clearly systematic. "You look absolutely exhausted," she'd say with concerned compassion, materializing beside his desk precisely when he was massaging his temples after particularly difficult conference calls. "Is everything manageable? You've been shouldering such tremendous responsibility lately." Matthew, feeling underappreciated at home and overwhelmed by professional pressures, began sharing intimate details about our marriage that no employee should ever hear from their supervisor. Sandra listened with perfect attention, offering sympathy and understanding that made him feel heard and validated in ways he claimed I no longer provided. "Ashley doesn't comprehend the pressures of executive leadership," he'd confide during these manufactured intimate conversations. "She expects business success to happen automatically, without understanding the sacrifices and risks involved. Sometimes I feel like I'm carrying the entire weight of our future alone." Sandra's responses were masterfully crafted to validate his grievances while positioning herself as the ideal solution to his problems. "You work incredibly hard to provide security for your family," she'd respond softly. "It must be frustrating when that dedication goes unrecognized. You deserve a partner who understands your ambitions and actively supports your dreams." Through these carefully orchestrated discussions, Sandra learned that Matthew felt trapped by domestic obligations, worried about his professional competence compared to younger executives, and desperately craved recognition for achievements that seemed invisible at home. She positioned herself as everything I supposedly wasn't: young enough to energize him, ambitious enough to match his drive, and grateful enough to appreciate his efforts. The expense fraud became increasingly audacious as Sandra's influence over Matthew's judgment grew stronger. Romantic dinners at exclusive restaurants appeared on company credit cards as client entertainment, despite the establishments specializing in couples dining rather than business networking. Weekend getaways to luxury resorts were classified as professional development retreats, at locations that offered no educational programs during the specified dates. A $2,000 shopping expedition to designer boutiques became a wardrobe consultation for client-facing presentations. Diamond earrings worth $1,200 were justified as employee recognition awards for exceptional performance on projects Sandra had contributed virtually nothing to. A weekend at the Four Seasons was categorized as a strategic planning workshop, Two people who somehow required 24-hour room service and couples spa treatments to develop quarterly objectives. When the accounting department questioned these suspicious expenses, Matthew became defensive and agitated, lecturing anyone who challenged these charges about the importance of employee development, relationship building, and creating positive workplace culture. He'd justify every fraudulent expense as necessary investment in Sandra's professional growth, apparently oblivious to how these explanations sounded to colleagues who understood basic ethical boundaries. Sandra's elevation from intern to unofficial executive happened so gradually that most employees didn't recognize how dramatically her role had expanded until her transformation was already complete. Her business cards suddenly identified her as a strategic development consultant, rather than a temporary intern. She began scheduling high-level meetings independently, using Matthew's authority to arrange appointments with major vendors and potential clients as if she'd been granted official power of attorney. Other departments started directing complex operational questions to Sandra when Matthew was unavailable, treating her like she possessed decision-making authority that had never been formally granted or announced. She attended industry conferences as our company's official representative, networking with competitors and potential partners while distributing business cards that suggested she held senior management responsibilities. Her workspace relocated from the intern area to the executive wing, positioned where she could monitor Matthew's meetings while maintaining constant visual contact with his office throughout each day. She acquired premium technology, advanced software access, and administrative support that junior employees typically waited years to receive. Sandra had systematically installed herself as Matthew's business partner while maintaining the elaborate fiction that she was simply an eager intern learning corporate procedures. The deception was so comprehensive that even I began questioning whether Matthew had received a promotion requiring this level of executive assistance, until I realized no such advancement had ever been announced or approved by our board of directors. By early December, Sandra's integration into our personal and professional lives felt complete. She'd become Cynthia's gardening protégé and confidant, Matthew's indispensable business partner and emotional support system, and the office favorite who somehow managed every project while maintaining her innocent intern facade. Her web of influence had expanded to encompass every aspect of Matthew's world, leaving me increasingly isolated and irrelevant. The holiday season was approaching, and Cynthia had already begun making elaborate plans for the annual company Christmas party. But this year her excitement about the event carried an intensity that felt different from typical holiday enthusiasm. Her phone calls became more frequent, her planning more detailed, and her references to special announcements and important celebrations more pointed. Something significant was being orchestrated for that party, and I had the sinking feeling that Sandra's months of careful manipulation were building toward a climactic moment that would change everything forever. My sinking feeling about the Christmas party proved accurate as Cynthia's planning reached levels of obsessive detail that alarmed even her closest friends. The woman who'd previously delegated party arrangements to event coordinators was now personally inspecting every napkin fold and testing multiple sound system configurations to ensure perfect acoustics throughout the hotel ballroom. "The lighting has to create exactly the right atmosphere," she explained during one of her daily planning calls, her voice trembling with nervous energy. "I've arranged for additional spotlights near the head table so everyone can see clearly when the important moments happen." Her emphasis on important moments sent chills down my spine, though she refused to elaborate when I asked what she meant. The guest list became her consuming project, revised and refined dozens of times over 3 weeks. She'd call Matthew at work to discuss whether specific clients should attend, whether certain employees deserved invitations, and how many tables would be needed to accommodate everyone she deemed essential witnesses. I watched her spread seating charts across our dining room table like a military strategist planning a crucial campaign, using colored markers to indicate different categories of attendees. "Sandra needs to be positioned where everyone can see her clearly," Cynthia muttered while adjusting place cards for the 5th time that evening. "She should sit between Matthew and Walter Morrison so she's part of the executive conversation." When I pointed out that interns traditionally sat with other junior employees, Cynthia waved away my concern with impatient irritation. "Sandra isn't like other interns. She deserves recognition for her contributions to the company's success." Her excitement about the party felt different from normal holiday enthusiasm. This carried the electric anticipation of someone orchestrating a performance where every element had been carefully choreographed for maximum impact. She'd test different microphone positions to ensure her voice would carry clearly throughout the ballroom, practice walking routes between tables to time her movements perfectly, and even rehearse gestures and facial expressions in front of our hallway mirror. Matthew's behavior during these pre-party weeks became increasingly erratic in ways that made our house feel like it contained a ticking time bomb. He'd pace our living room while conducting whispered phone conversations, his voice dropping to barely audible murmurs whenever I appeared in doorways. His usual appetite vanished completely. I'd prepare his favorite meals only to watch him push food around his plate while staring into space with an expression of profound anxiety mixed with anticipation. Sleep became impossible for him. I'd wake at 2 or 3 in the morning to find his side of the bed empty, eventually discovering him sitting in his home office staring at documents spread across his desk. When I'd approach to ask what was wrong, he'd quickly shuffle papers into folders and slam his laptop shut, insisting everything was fine while his hands shook with obvious nervous tension. His work performance began suffering noticeably. Colleagues mentioned his distracted behavior during important presentations, his inability to focus during budget meetings, and his tendency to forget crucial details about ongoing projects. The confident executive who'd once commanded respect through competence and decisiveness had been replaced by someone who seemed constantly on edge, as if carrying secrets that were physically exhausting to maintain. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked one evening after watching him stare at his dinner plate for 20 minutes without taking a single bite. "You seem incredibly stressed about something." "Just work pressures," he'd snap, then immediately apologize for his harsh tone. "Sorry, I'm fine. Everything's under control." But his trembling hands and the dark circles under his eyes suggested nothing was under control. Sandra's confidence during this period reached almost insufferable levels. She walked through the office like someone who'd already received a promotion that hadn't been publicly announced, her posture straight with satisfaction and her smile carrying a smugness that made my stomach turn with dread. During casual conversations with other employees, she'd make cryptic references to exciting changes ahead and new developments that would surprise everyone. "I have such a bright future with this company," she'd tell anyone who'd listen, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who possessed inside information about decisions that hadn't been made public yet. When colleagues asked about her post-internship plans, she'd smile mysteriously and hint that her role might be evolving in ways that would benefit everyone involved. Her wardrobe underwent a dramatic transformation during these weeks, shifting from appropriate intern attire to outfits that belonged in executive boardrooms rather than entry-level positions. Designer dresses, expensive jewelry, and professional accessories that cost more than most junior employees earned in a month. She was dressing for a role she hadn't been officially offered, as if her promotion was already guaranteed and she was simply waiting for the public announcement. The most disturbing aspect of these weeks was how the office atmosphere changed around me. Conversations would stop mid-sentence when I entered break rooms, followed by awkward smiles and obvious topic changes that fooled absolutely no one. Margaret from accounting, who'd been my coffee companion for 2 years, suddenly became unavailable for our usual morning chats. Janet from HR avoided making eye contact during meetings, her warm greetings replaced by polite nods and hasty exits. I began noticing colleagues glancing between Matthew and Sandra with knowing expressions that suggested they understood something I was missing. The whispers followed me through hallways, conversations that ceased so abruptly when I approached that the resulting silence felt heavy with unspoken knowledge. Some coworkers started treating me with premature sympathy, their kindness carrying an undertone of pity that made me want to demand explanations no one seemed willing to provide. The most frightening part was Matthew's complete obliviousness to these changed dynamics. He was so absorbed in whatever secret plans were consuming his thoughts that he couldn't see how obviously his colleagues had become aware of his situation. The man who'd once been politically astute and socially aware had become so focused on his private drama that he'd lost all perspective on how his behavior appeared to others. Walter Morrison's presence at company events increased dramatically during this period, though his attendance felt more investigative than social. He'd position himself strategically to observe Matthew and Sandra's interactions without appearing obvious, his experienced businessman's smile never quite reaching his eyes when he watched their exchanges. During presentations, his questions became increasingly pointed and specific, probing into areas of Matthew's responsibilities with laser-like precision that suggested he was building a comprehensive case. I caught him photographing documents with his phone during the quarterly review meeting, quickly pocketing the device when he noticed my attention. His conversations with other employees seemed designed to extract information rather than maintain social pleasantries, though his subjects appeared unaware they were being systematically interviewed about Matthew's professional performance and personal behavior. His attention to Sandra felt particularly intense. He'd watch her movements around the office, listen to her conversations with other employees, and ask subtle questions about her background and qualifications that revealed far more interest than a casual observer would demonstrate. When our eyes would meet across crowded rooms, Walter would nod slightly, as if we shared an understanding about something neither of us was prepared to discuss openly. His presence began feeling less like a concerned shareholder attending corporate social functions and more like a detective gathering evidence for a case that was rapidly approaching its conclusion. The hotel ballroom had been reserved, the invitations sent, the stage set for whatever dramatic revelation Cynthia and Matthew were planning to unleash on an unsuspecting audience. As the party date approached, I realized I was no longer just a wife watching her marriage crumble. I was about to become an unwilling participant in a public spectacle that would destroy everything I'd believed about my life, my husband, and my future. The public spectacle I'd been dreading finally arrived, and the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel buzzed with the familiar energy of our company's annual Christmas celebration, though I now understood I was about to become its unwilling centerpiece. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables decorated with gold and burgundy linens, while a jazz quartet played softly near the bar. The scene appeared identical to previous years, yet the electric tension I'd been sensing for weeks had intensified into something almost tangible. Every smile felt forced. Every laugh carried an undercurrent of anticipation, and the air itself seemed charged with the promise of drama about to unfold. I arrived alone after Matthew claimed he needed to be there early for final coordination with the event staff. The lie felt transparent now, though I'd accepted his explanation without question hours earlier. As I handed my coat to the attendant, I spotted him near the entrance greeting guests with manic energy that bordered on hysteria. His smile stretched too wide, his laughter rang too loud, and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie repeatedly. Sandra made her entrance like an actress stepping onto a stage she'd been rehearsing for all her life. The crimson dress she wore hugged her figure perfectly, its fabric shimmering under the ballroom lights as she glided through the crowd with practiced grace. Every head turned to watch her progress through the room, every conversation paused as she passed. Every colleague seemed drawn to compliment her appearance or engage her in animated discussion. Her confidence radiated from every gesture, the way she tilted her head when listening, the perfectly timed laughter at mediocre jokes, the graceful way she accepted champagne from waiters who lingered longer than necessary around her table. She moved through the party like someone who knew she was about to be crowned queen and was graciously accepting early homage from her future subjects. Cynthia positioned herself strategically near the dessert buffet, her excitement barely contained as she monitored Sandra's social triumph. She kept checking her gold watch and scanning the crowd, apparently waiting for all the essential witnesses to arrive before beginning whatever performance she'd been choreographing for weeks. When she caught my eye across the room, her smile carried a smugness that made my chest tighten with dread. "Ashley, you look lovely tonight," she said when I approached to fulfill social obligations, though her tone suggested she found my simple black dress disappointingly modest compared to Sandra's dramatic presentation. "I do hope you're prepared for an evening full of wonderful surprises." The emphasis on wonderful surprises sent warning signals through every nerve in my body, though I managed appropriate pleasantries while my mind raced through possibilities of what those surprises might entail. Around us, colleagues mingled with their usual holiday enthusiasm, completely unaware they were about to witness something that would dominate office gossip for months. The marketing team discussed year-end campaigns, the sales department celebrated quarterly achievements, and the administrative staff compared vacation plans while the stage was being set for my public destruction. Walter Morrison arrived precisely at 7:30, his entrance commanding immediate attention from senior management. I watched him survey the ballroom with the calculating assessment of someone evaluating a business transaction, his eyes lingering on Matthew and Sandra's interactions with particular intensity. When our gazes met briefly, he nodded politely, but something in his expression suggested he possessed information about tonight's agenda that most guests lacked. The dinner portion proceeded with deceptive normalcy. Conversations flowed over herb-crusted salmon and roasted vegetables while I sat with accounting department colleagues, trying to focus on their discussions about budget projections and staffing changes. My attention kept drifting to the head table where Matthew sat beside Sandra, their conversation appearing intimate despite the crowded setting. As dessert plates were cleared away, I noticed the subtle shift in energy that preceded significant announcements. The jazz quartet concluded their final set, conversations gradually quieted, and guests sensed something important was about to happen. My heart began hammering against my ribs as Cynthia rose from her chair and moved toward the small stage area where the microphone waited. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice carried clearly across the ballroom as she tapped her champagne flute with a silver dessert spoon. "I hope you're all enjoying this wonderful celebration of our company's continued success and the exceptional people who make it possible." Polite applause rippled through the crowd as guests prepared for what they assumed would be standard holiday remarks followed by the resumption of party festivities. But Cynthia's energy felt different from previous years, more focused, more purposeful, like someone about to deliver news she'd been anticipating with barely contained excitement. "Tonight, I want to take a special moment to recognize my son Matthew's outstanding contributions to this organization," she continued, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. "His leadership, his vision, and his remarkable ability to recognize and cultivate extraordinary talent have been instrumental in our continued growth." Matthew's face flushed deep red as colleagues turned to acknowledge him with approving nods and scattered applause. But I could see the tremor in his hands as he reached for his water glass, the way his smile failed to reach his anxious eyes, the subtle signs of someone about to participate in something that simultaneously thrilled and terrified him. "Matthew's exceptional leadership has attracted truly remarkable people to our organization," Cynthia continued, her gaze shifting meaningfully toward Sandra. "People who bring fresh perspectives, innovative approaches, and the kind of dynamic energy that propels successful companies toward their brightest futures." The room remained attentive but relaxed, expecting corporate praise followed by holiday wishes and dancing. Nobody seemed to sense the devastating announcement that was about to shatter the pleasant evening atmosphere. "Which is why I'm absolutely delighted to share some truly wonderful news with all of you tonight," Cynthia declared, her voice rising with triumphant joy that made my blood freeze in my veins. The moment had arrived. Everything, the weeks of planning, the secretive phone calls, the nervous energy, the strategic seating arrangements, had been building toward this single devastating revelation that would destroy my life in front of everyone I worked with. "I want you all to meet Sandra Morrison," Cynthia announced with radiant maternal pride, "Matthew's future wife and the remarkable woman who represents everything our family needs moving forward into the future." The silence that followed felt like a physical force pressing down on the entire ballroom. Every conversation stopped mid-syllable, every champagne flute paused halfway to lips. Every face turned toward the head table where Sandra sat glowing with victorious satisfaction while I stood frozen in the crowd, watching my marriage die in public. "She's young, brilliant, ambitious, and free from the complications that can sometimes hold successful men back," Cynthia concluded with triumphant satisfaction, her words echoing through the stunned ballroom like a death sentence delivered with maternal pride. The silence that followed felt eternal. I stood frozen among the crowd, watching my husband embrace Sandra while accepting congratulations from colleagues who'd attended our wedding 5 years earlier. The betrayal was complete, performed in front of everyone who'd known us as a married couple, transforming my humiliation into evening entertainment. But as I watched this carefully orchestrated performance reach its devastating climax, something inside me snapped. The months of gaslighting, the financial deception, the public humiliation, all of it crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. I wasn't going to remain the silent victim in their scripted drama. I took a deep breath, gathered every ounce of strength I possessed, and stepped forward into the center of the ballroom. The movement felt deliberate and powerful, like walking onto a stage where I finally understood my role wasn't to be the discarded wife, but the woman who would expose the truth. "Excuse me, everyone," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the silent room with authority that surprised even me. Conversations that had been resuming in nervous whispers stopped completely as faces turned toward me with curiosity and concern. I think there's been some significant confusion tonight that needs to be addressed. Matthew's face went ashen as he realized I wasn't planning to disappear quietly from this scene. Sandra's confident smile wavered for the first time since I'd known her, replaced by an expression of alert caution that suggested she understood something was about to shift dramatically. The entire ballroom fell into complete silence, sensing that whatever was about to unfold would eclipse even the shocking announcement they'd just witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced with growing confidence, feeling power flow through my voice as I reclaimed control of the narrative, "I'd like you all to meet Sandra Morrison properly. Not just any Morrison but Walter Morrison's daughter." The collective gasp that erupted across the room was immediately followed by confused murmuring as heads swiveled between Sandra and Walter Morrison, who stood near the bar observing the proceedings with calculated attention. I watched Sandra's carefully constructed mask slip completely as people finally made the connection they'd somehow missed. "Sandra hasn't been working as an intern to gain business experience or to fall in love with my husband," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each revelation. "She's been conducting a comprehensive investigation into Matthew's financial activities on behalf of the company's largest shareholder." The room exploded into whispered conversations as the implications of my words began sinking in. Matthew's face cycled from pale to red to a sickly green color as he processed what I was revealing to his colleagues and superiors. Cynthia looked completely bewildered, her moment of maternal triumph crumbling as she realized she'd been manipulated by someone far more intelligent than she'd imagined. Sandra stood motionless for several seconds, apparently weighing her options before making a decision that would define the rest of the evening. Then she stepped forward with the poise and dignity of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment to reveal her true identity. "Ashley is absolutely correct," Sandra announced, her voice now carrying the professional authority of someone dropping their carefully maintained disguise. "I am Walter Morrison's daughter, and for the past 21 days, I've been documenting Matthew's systematic misuse of company funds and resources." Her transformation from seductive intern to competent investigator was breathtaking in its completeness. The flirtatious mannerisms disappeared, replaced by crisp professionalism as she reached into her purse and withdrew a thick leather portfolio that had apparently been her constant companion throughout this deception. "Matthew has been charging personal expenses to corporate credit cards," she explained with clinical precision, opening the folder to reveal photographs, receipts, and detailed documentation. "Romantic dinners at expensive restaurants have been classified as client entertainment. Weekend getaways to luxury resorts have been listed as professional development conferences. Expensive jewelry purchases have been categorized as employee recognition awards." The room remained absolutely silent as Sandra methodically dismantled Matthew's reputation with facts and evidence that painted an undeniable picture of systematic fraud. Her presentation was thorough, professional, and devastating, delivered with the precision of someone who'd been trained specifically for this type of revelation. "The evidence shows a pattern of deliberate financial misconduct spanning several months," Sandra continued, her voice steady and authoritative. "Personal vacations charged as business travel, romantic gifts purchased with company funds, and expense reports that consistently misrepresent the nature and purpose of these transactions." As Sandra spoke, Walter Morrison began moving through the crowd toward the front of the room. His approach commanded immediate attention, and conversations died completely as everyone recognized the gravity of having the company's primary shareholder personally involved in what was unfolding. "Thank you, Sandra, for your exceptional work on this investigation," Walter said with unmistakable paternal pride, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. "Over the past several months, I noticed irregularities in our financial reports that suggested either gross incompetence or deliberate fraud within our management structure." His explanation was measured and professional, but his disappointment in Matthew was evident to everyone present. The room hung on his every word as he continued with the authority of someone who controlled the futures of everyone in that ballroom. "Rather than make accusations without substantial proof, I chose to conduct a thorough investigation using methods that would provide irrefutable evidence," Walter explained. "My daughter volunteered for this assignment because her educational background in forensic accounting and her investigative training made her uniquely qualified to gather the comprehensive evidence we required." Walter's presence had transformed the Christmas party from a social gathering into a corporate tribunal, with Matthew standing exposed as the defendant who'd already been judged and found guilty by an impartial jury of facts and documentation. "Matthew Williams," Walter announced with formal finality that echoed through the stunned ballroom. "Effective immediately, your employment with this company is terminated for cause." The words landed like physical blows, each syllable punctuating the complete reversal of fortune that had occurred within minutes. Matthew stood speechless, his face cycling through disbelief, desperate anger, and growing panic as the full scope of his situation became clear. "Your access to all company accounts, facilities, and resources is immediately revoked," Walter continued with the efficiency of someone protecting substantial business interests. "You'll be contacted by our legal team regarding full restitution for the funds you've misappropriated, and will be cooperating fully with any criminal investigation that may follow." The same colleagues who'd been offering congratulations on his engagement moments earlier now stepped backward, instinctively distancing themselves from someone who'd become professionally toxic overnight. Cynthia stood frozen near the dessert table, her face showing complete mortification as she realized her celebratory announcement had directly precipitated her son's public destruction. The Christmas party that was supposed to mark Matthew's triumphant new beginning had instead become the stage for his complete professional execution, witnessed by every person who'd ever worked with him or respected his business judgment. But as I stood there watching justice unfold in real time, I realized this was only the beginning of the consequences Matthew would face for choosing deception over honesty, temporary gratification over lasting integrity, and public humiliation of his wife over private resolution of our marriage problems. But as I stood there watching justice unfold in real time, I realized this was only the beginning of the consequences Matthew would face for choosing deception over honesty, temporary gratification over lasting integrity, and public humiliation of his wife over private resolution of our marriage problems. The aftermath was swift and merciless. The festive atmosphere that had filled the ballroom minutes earlier evaporated completely, replaced by the uncomfortable energy of people who'd witnessed something they'd rather forget. Guests began gathering their coats and purses with unusual haste, casting furtive glances at the destroyed tableau we'd become while murmuring awkward goodbyes to their hosts. The exodus was telling in its urgency. Former colleagues who'd been slapping Matthew's back and offering congratulations suddenly discovered pressing reasons to leave early. Their warm handshakes and celebratory drinks were replaced by embarrassed avoidance of eye contact and hurried departures that spoke volumes about how quickly professional relationships could dissolve when ethical boundaries were crossed. "Well, this has certainly been enlightening," I heard someone whisper near the coat check. "I had no idea Matthew was involved in anything like this." The conversations were hushed but audible, creating a soundtrack of professional death that would follow Matthew long after tonight's revelations. The festive holiday music continued playing from the sound system, creating a surreal contrast to the devastating scene unfolding below the twinkling lights and gold decorations. Christmas songs about joy and celebration provided an almost mocking backdrop to the complete destruction of a man's career and reputation. Matthew stood near the head table looking utterly abandoned, his confident posture from earlier in the evening completely collapsed. The same people who'd been buying him drinks and congratulating him on his engagement now gave him a wide berth, as if his professional toxicity might somehow be contagious. His attempts to engage departing colleagues in conversation were met with polite but firm dismissals that left him increasingly isolated. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding," he insisted to anyone within earshot, his voice carrying the desperate hollow ring of someone whose lies had finally caught up with them. "The expenses were legitimate business costs. My relationship with Sandra was purely professional until very recently." But Sandra's evidence folder had already done its devastating work. The receipts, photographs, and detailed documentation she'd presented contradicted every excuse he attempted to offer. His explanations became increasingly frantic as he realized that no one, not his former colleagues, not the company executives who'd once trusted his judgment, not even the catering staff who'd overheard enough to understand his true character, believed anything he said anymore. His reputation, carefully built over years of professional achievement, crumbled completely in the space of a single evening. The weight of evidence against him was so comprehensive that his protests only served to insult everyone's intelligence further. Each desperate attempt at justification made him appear more pathetic and dishonest. Cynthia had retreated to a corner chair near the dessert table, her face buried in her manicured hands as the full magnitude of her catastrophic mistake became clear. The woman who'd orchestrated tonight's announcement as her son's triumphant moment had actually provided the perfect stage for his professional execution. Her role in Matthew's destruction carried a cruel irony that wasn't lost on the remaining guests. Her effusive praise of Sandra's qualities, her public endorsement of their relationship, and her enthusiastic introduction had given Walter's daughter exactly the credibility and platform needed to deliver the most damaging blow possible to Matthew's career. Former friends and social acquaintances began treating Cynthia with a mixture of pity and subtle blame, understanding that her meddling in Matthew's marriage had created the perfect conditions for his downfall. The sophisticated society matron who'd spent decades building influential connections suddenly found herself socially isolated, her credibility destroyed by her own manipulative actions. Sandra, meanwhile, demonstrated remarkable grace under pressure as she methodically packed her evidence materials while fielding procedural questions from Walter. Her transformation from seductive intern to competent investigator was one of the evening's most impressive revelations, proving she possessed skills that went far beyond anything her colleagues had imagined. Other party guests began approaching her with newfound respect, finally understanding they'd completely misjudged her capabilities and motivations. The woman they'd dismissed as just another pretty intern seeking advancement through charm had actually been conducting a sophisticated undercover investigation that required exceptional emotional intelligence and strategic thinking. "I have to admit I'm impressed," I overheard Janet from HR telling another colleague. "The way she maintained her cover while gathering that level of evidence shows remarkable professionalism. We all completely underestimated her." Sandra's handling of Matthew's inappropriate advances and Cynthia's manipulative behavior throughout her assignment demonstrated a level of self-control and dedication that commanded genuine admiration from people who now understood the true nature of her mission. Standing in that ballroom watching my world reshape itself in real time, I experienced a complex mixture of emotions I hadn't expected. The vindication was both sweet and sharp. Finally, everyone could see what I'd suspected for months but couldn't prove definitively. Matthew's betrayal was no longer my private torment but established fact, witnessed by dozens of people who now understood why I'd seemed increasingly distant and unhappy at recent company events. But beneath the satisfaction of being proven right lay a profound sadness for the marriage I'd thought we shared, the future I'd imagined we were building together, and the man I'd believed Matthew could become. The dreams we'd discussed, the plans we'd made, the life we'd supposedly been creating, all of it had been fiction while he pursued his selfish desires at my expense. Yet underneath both the vindication and the grief was an unexpected sense of relief that felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for months. No more wondering if my suspicions were paranoid. No more questioning my own perceptions or gaslighting myself into believing his explanations. No more pretending everything was fine when clearly nothing had been fine for a very long time. The exhaustion of maintaining facades, hiding concerns, and protecting his reputation while he systematically betrayed our marriage lifted from my shoulders like a physical weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. For the first time in months I could breathe freely, knowing the truth was finally visible to everyone who mattered. The Christmas party that was supposed to celebrate Matthew's bright future had instead become the public forum for revealing his true character. Justice had been served with devastating efficiency, witnessed by everyone who'd ever respected his professional judgment or believed in his personal integrity. But as I watched the remaining guests file out of the ballroom, I knew this evening's revelations were just the beginning of consequences that would reshape all our lives in ways none of us had fully anticipated. But as I watched the remaining guests file out of the ballroom, I knew this evening's revelations were just the beginning of consequences that would reshape all our lives in ways none of us had fully anticipated. Walter Morrison approached me as the last stragglers gathered their belongings, his presence both commanding and oddly comforting in the chaos of the evening's aftermath. The hotel lobby had become a refuge from the ballroom's devastation, its neutral beige walls and soft lighting providing a stark contrast to the scene we'd just witnessed. "Ashley," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been orchestrating events from behind the scenes for months. "I believe I owe you a comprehensive explanation about how we arrived at tonight's conclusion." He guided me toward a secluded seating area near the lobby's fireplace, away from the scattered groups of departing party guests who were still processing what they'd witnessed. His manner was both paternal and professional, like a doctor about to explain a complex diagnosis to a patient's family member. I've been monitoring Matthew's questionable financial activities for nearly 8 months, Walter began, settling into the leather chair across from me with the measured movements of someone accustomed to delivering serious news. The irregularities in our expense reports weren't immediately obvious, but patterns emerged that suggested either remarkable incompetence or deliberate fraud. His explanation unfolded with the precision of someone who'd been carrying this burden alone for too long. The investigation had begun when routine audits revealed discrepancies that couldn't be explained by normal accounting errors or system glitches. Matthew's expense reports consistently pushed boundaries while remaining just barely within plausible limits, a strategy that suggested sophisticated understanding of how to steal without triggering automatic red flags. I could have confronted Matthew privately, Walter continued, his businessman's instincts evident in every calculated decision. But men in his position are typically skilled at explaining away their mistakes, shifting blame to subordinates, or promising reform while continuing their destructive behavior. I needed irrefutable evidence that would leave no room for manipulation or negotiation. The scope of his investigation was far more comprehensive than I'd imagined. Walter's security team had been tracking Matthew's computer activity, monitoring his credit card transactions, and documenting his attempts to disguise personal expenses as legitimate business costs. Every fraudulent dinner, every unauthorized trip, every piece of jewelry purchased with company funds had been meticulously cataloged and verified. We have video surveillance of Matthew using corporate credit cards for personal purchases, Walter explained with the thoroughness of someone building a legal case. Audio recordings of him lying about business expenses during budget meetings. Written documentation of his attempts to manipulate financial reports to cover unauthorized expenditures. But the most revealing aspect of Walter's explanation was how carefully he'd protected my interests throughout the investigation. His team had gathered extensive evidence showing my complete ignorance of Matthew's criminal activities, my attempts to question suspicious expenses, and my obvious exclusion from his financial decision-making processes. Your divorce attorney will have everything needed to prove Matthew's infidelity, financial irresponsibility, and systematic deception, he assured me, his voice carrying genuine concern for my welfare. You'll be able to claim your rightful share of legitimate marital assets while being completely protected from liability for his stolen funds. Walter's fatherly concern extended beyond mere legal protection. He'd ensured that company records would show my professional competence and ethical behavior, safeguarding my reputation in an industry where association with financial fraud could destroy career prospects permanently. Sandra's qualifications for this assignment were exceptional, Walter said with unmistakable paternal pride. She graduated summa cum laude from Wharton with dual degrees in business administration and forensic accounting, then spent 2 years with the FBI's white-collar crime division before specializing in corporate security. The revelation that Sandra was a trained investigator rather than a naive intern reframed everything I'd witnessed over the past months. Her ability to maintain her cover while enduring Matthew's inappropriate advances and Cynthia's manipulative behavior demonstrated professional skills I'd never suspected. This wasn't Sandra's first undercover assignment, Walter continued. She's successfully infiltrated 3 other organizations where financial irregularities were suspected, gathering evidence that led to successful prosecutions and recovered millions in stolen company funds. Her transformation from seductive intern to competent professional investigator suddenly made perfect sense. The sophisticated questions about financial procedures, the rapid access to confidential documents, the strategic positioning within Matthew's sphere of influence, all of it had been carefully calculated to maximize her investigative effectiveness. When I realized we needed someone who could get close enough to Matthew to document his activities comprehensively, Sandra volunteered immediately, Walter explained. She understood the assignment would require her to endure uncomfortable personal advances and manipulative family dynamics, but she was determined to protect the company and its employees from further financial damage. The timing of tonight's revelation had been orchestrated with military precision. Walter needed Matthew to feel completely secure before exposing him, ensuring he wouldn't destroy evidence or transfer remaining stolen funds to hidden accounts. The Christmas party provided the perfect setting because Matthew would be relaxed and confident, surrounded by colleagues who would witness his downfall and ensure the story spread throughout the business community. Cynthia's announcement was anticipated and even encouraged. Walter admitted with the strategic thinking that had made him successful in business. Sandra carefully manipulated your mother-in-law's desires and prejudices, making sure she felt confident enough to make a public statement about Matthew's supposed engagement. The cruel irony wasn't lost on either of us. Cynthia's attempt to publicly humiliate me had actually provided the perfect platform for her son's professional execution. Her maternal pride had become the instrument of his destruction, witnessed by everyone who'd ever respected his business judgment. We knew Matthew's complete professional isolation would follow naturally from tonight's events, Walter continued. No company in our industry will risk hiring someone with his ethical violations, and his reputation will ensure that tonight's story follows him wherever he attempts to restart his career. As Walter's explanation concluded, I realized the evening's events weren't just about exposing Matthew's fraud or protecting company assets. They represented a masterclass in strategic justice, delivered with precision that ensured maximum consequences for the perpetrator while protecting innocent parties from collateral damage. The investigation had been designed not just to catch a thief, but to ensure that his punishment would be comprehensive, permanent, and publicly witnessed by everyone who mattered in his professional and personal life. Walter had orchestrated Matthew's complete downfall while simultaneously building a foundation for my fresh start, free from the burden of his crimes and deception. Standing in that hotel lobby, I finally understood that tonight's revelation was the culmination of months of careful planning designed to deliver justice with devastating efficiency while protecting everyone Matthew had betrayed or endangered through his selfish choices. Standing in that hotel lobby, I finally understood that tonight's revelation was the culmination of months of careful planning designed to deliver justice with devastating efficiency while protecting everyone Matthew had betrayed or endangered through his selfish choices. But understanding Walter's master plan was only the beginning. As I drove home through the empty streets, my mind was already shifting toward the practical steps I needed to take to reclaim my life from the wreckage Matthew had created. The evidence Walter had provided would be the foundation for my legal strategy, but I needed to act quickly while the momentum was still in my favor. Monday morning found me sitting across from Rebecca Martinez in her downtown law office, two thick folders of evidence spread across her mahogany desk like weapons in an arsenal I was finally ready to deploy. Rebecca's reputation for handling high-stakes divorces was legendary in our city. She'd represented politicians, business executives, and celebrities through some of the most contentious marital battles our courts had ever seen. "This is extraordinary," Rebecca said, reviewing Walter's documentation with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every type of marital betrayal imaginable. Her occasional nods and raised eyebrows indicated she understood not just the strength of my position, but the meticulous care with which the evidence had been assembled. The financial records alone painted a devastating picture of systematic theft disguised as business expenses. Credit card statements showed romantic dinners at intimate restaurants charged as client entertainment, weekend getaways to luxury resorts listed as professional development conferences, and expensive jewelry purchases classified as employee recognition awards. Each fraudulent transaction was supported by receipts, photographs, and witness statements that would make denial impossible. "Your husband's actions have made this divorce incredibly straightforward from a legal standpoint," Rebecca continued, her voice mixing professional admiration with personal sympathy. "Most divorce cases involve he-said-she-said arguments about infidelity or financial irresponsibility. You have documentary proof of both, plus evidence of criminal behavior that puts him in an impossible negotiating position." The adultery evidence was equally comprehensive. Sandra's investigative report included detailed timelines of Matthew's deceptive behavior, photographs of him entering hotels with another woman, and documentation of his lies about business travel. The contrast between his claimed whereabouts and his actual activities was so blatant it bordered on insulting to anyone with basic intelligence. "We can file on grounds of adultery, financial irresponsibility, and emotional cruelty," Rebecca explained as she organized the evidence into legal categories. "The criminal fraud allegations will prevent him from fighting any of our claims, because drawing attention to the divorce would only highlight his illegal activities for prosecutors." The actual moment of filing felt both monumental and surprisingly anticlimactic. After months of emotional turmoil and uncertainty, The legal end of my marriage came down to signing documents that transformed my personal tragedy into bureaucratic procedure. Each signature felt like shedding layers of skin I'd outgrown, releasing myself from a relationship that had become a prison of lies and manipulation. "You're not just ending a marriage," Rebecca observed as I signed the final petition. "You're reclaiming your identity and your future from someone who was systematically destroying both. These papers represent your declaration of independence from his chaos and criminality." The relief was immediate and profound, like finally exhaling after holding my breath for months. I'd spent so much energy trying to save something that had already been murdered by Matthew's choices. Now I was simply making that death official and legal, freeing myself to begin the process of rebuilding rather than constantly repairing damage he kept inflicting. Walking out of Rebecca's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of Matthew's secrets, lies, and financial crimes was no longer mine to carry. I was no longer complicit in maintaining facades or protecting his reputation while he systematically betrayed everything we'd supposedly built together. The legal proceedings moved with unusual speed, primarily because Matthew's attorney recognized that fighting would only make his criminal situation worse. Rebecca received a call that same afternoon from his lawyer, essentially a surrender before the battle had even begun. His counsel understands that contesting this divorce would highlight Matthew's criminal behavior and provide prosecutors with additional evidence, Rebecca explained with evident satisfaction. They're recommending complete cooperation with our terms in exchange for our discretion about the most damaging details. Matthew's negotiating position was non-existent. His stolen company funds had been frozen by court order, his employment had been terminated for cause, and his reputation was destroyed throughout the business community. He had nothing to bargain with except his willingness to accept whatever terms we proposed without resistance. The settlement negotiations were brief and one-sided. I would retain our house, my retirement accounts, and my personal assets while being completely protected from liability for his stolen funds or criminal debts. Matthew would leave the marriage with his personal belongings and whatever legitimate assets could be identified after restitution payments were calculated. The divorce that could have dragged on for years will be concluded in months, Rebecca assured me. You'll be free to rebuild your life while he deals with the legal consequences of his choices. Criminal prosecution typically takes much longer than divorce proceedings, so you'll have your fresh start long before his legal troubles are resolved. The empowerment of fighting back after months of victimization was intoxicating and healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. For too long, I'd been a passive observer watching Matthew and Cynthia make decisions that affected my future without my input or consent. Now I was making strategic choices, protected by excellent legal counsel and armed with evidence that guaranteed victory. The knowledge that Matthew would face comprehensive consequences for his betrayal felt like justice finally being served after months of injustice. I wasn't just escaping a destructive marriage. I was ensuring his actions would cost him everything he'd valued more than our relationship. Within days of filing, news of the divorce and its underlying causes began circulating through our professional and social circles with the speed of scandal. The combination of his termination for embezzlement and his wife's divorce filing for adultery created a narrative that painted Matthew as both professionally incompetent and personally untrustworthy. Former colleagues who might have given him benefit of doubt about his employment termination couldn't ignore the pattern of betrayal revealed by divorce proceedings. Social invitations stopped arriving, professional networking opportunities disappeared, and even casual acquaintances began avoiding him in public settings. The comprehensive destruction of his reputation extended beyond our immediate circle to the broader business community, where trust and integrity were essential for career advancement. Matthew had wanted to trade his stable marriage for excitement and elevated status. Instead, he traded his entire social and professional identity for temporary gratification and permanent shame. As I signed the final documents that would legally end our marriage, I realized this wasn't just about divorce. It was about reclaiming my right to live authentically rather than maintaining appearances that served everyone except myself. As I signed the final documents that would legally end our marriage, I realized this wasn't just about divorce. It was about reclaiming my right to live authentically rather than maintaining appearances that served everyone except myself. The months that followed moved with surprising swiftness, as if the universe had decided to accelerate the consequences Matthew had been avoiding for so long. Spring arrived early that year, And with it came a series of legal proceedings that would close this chapter of my life with the finality I desperately needed. The criminal trial began in March, exactly 3 months after that devastating Christmas party. I'd chosen to attend as a witness rather than a victim, wanting to see justice delivered with my own eyes rather than reading about it in newspaper articles or hearing second-hand accounts from Rebecca. The courthouse felt different from the family court where my divorce had been finalized. Here the atmosphere was more formal, more serious, carrying the weight of criminal justice rather than civil resolution. Matthew sat at the defendant's table wearing an ill-fitting gray suit that made him look smaller and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. Gone was the confident executive who'd once commanded respect in boardrooms and social gatherings. The prosecutor presented Walter's evidence with methodical precision, building a case that left no room for doubt about Matthew's systematic theft. $200,000 in fraudulent expenses, documented over 8 months of deliberate deception. Each credit card statement, each forged receipt, each fabricated expense report was entered into evidence with clinical efficiency. The defendant used his position of trust to steal from his employer while simultaneously betraying his wife and family, the prosecutor explained to the jury. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a single poor decision. This was calculated, ongoing criminal behavior designed to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford through legitimate means. Matthew's defense attorney could offer little beyond pleas for leniency based on his client's cooperation with authorities and supposed remorse for his actions. But remorse was hard to demonstrate when the evidence showed such calculated planning and deliberate deception over such an extended period. I watched from the gallery as witness after witness testified about Matthew's fraudulent activities. Sandra took the stand with professional composure, explaining her investigation and the evidence she'd gathered without revealing any personal animosity despite the inappropriate advances she'd endured. Walter testified about the company's financial losses and the damage to employee morale caused by Matthew's breach of trust. Even some of Matthew's former colleagues testified, their reluctance evident but their duty to honesty ultimately prevailing over personal loyalty. The picture they painted was of a man who'd become increasingly reckless and arrogant, believing his position protected him from consequences. When the judge pronounced the sentence, 2 years in state prison followed by 3 years of probation and full restitution, Matthew's legs visibly buckled. The confident man who'd publicly humiliated me at a Christmas party was replaced by someone who could barely stand to face the consequences of his own choices. Cynthia sat alone in the back row throughout the proceedings, a shadow of the commanding woman who'd orchestrated what she'd thought would be her son's triumph. The months since that Christmas party had aged her dramatically. Her perfectly styled hair had gone gray, her expensive clothes hung loosely on a frame that seemed to have shrunk with shame, and her once sharp eyes now carried the vacant look of someone who'd lost everything she'd thought mattered. She never approached me during the court proceedings, but I caught her staring at me several times with an expression that mixed regret with something that might have been recognition of her own culpability. The woman who'd wanted to replace me as her son's wife had instead orchestrated the destruction of everything she'd claimed to value about him. My divorce had been finalized weeks earlier with terms that exceeded even Rebecca's optimistic predictions. I retained our house, my retirement savings, and my personal assets while being completely protected from liability for Matthew's criminal debts. The settlement also included provisions for ongoing financial security that would allow me to rebuild my life without financial stress. Walking out of the courthouse after Matthew's sentencing felt like stepping into sunlight after months in a cave. The weight of his lies, his betrayal, and his criminal behavior was finally off my shoulders. I was no longer married to a man who'd systematically deceived me, no longer responsible for maintaining facades that protected his reputation, no longer complicit in a relationship built on dishonesty. Sandra had parlayed her successful investigation into a thriving consulting career. Word of her professional competence spread quickly through the corporate security community, leading to job offers from major firms specializing in white-collar crime detection. Her unique combination of business education, investigative training, and proven field experience made her extremely valuable in a market where companies were increasingly concerned about internal fraud. "She's probably the most sought-after investigator in the region now," Walter told me during one of our occasional coffee meetings. 3 different firms have made her offers, and she's getting requests to speak at industry conferences about undercover corporate investigations. Sandra had transformed what could have been a traumatic experience into professional advancement, proving that intelligence and determination could overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Her success also validated Walter's faith in her abilities and his decision to trust her with such a sensitive assignment. Walter's company not only recovered its stolen funds but also implemented comprehensive new oversight procedures designed to prevent future embezzlement. His handling of the crisis became a case study in effective corporate governance, with business publications writing articles about his innovative approach to internal fraud detection. The board of directors had unanimously praised his leadership, viewing the incident as proof of his commitment to protecting shareholder interests regardless of personal relationships or potential corporate embarrassment. His willingness to expose Matthew's crimes, even when it involved family-like loyalty, demonstrated the kind of principled leadership that attracted both investors and talented employees. Sometimes doing the right thing requires difficult choices, Walter reflected during one of our conversations. But protecting the integrity of the company and its employees was worth the temporary discomfort of conducting an investigation that involved people we trusted. For me, the most profound realization came not from watching Matthew receive his punishment, but from understanding how completely I'd reclaimed my own life. The woman who'd stood in that ballroom being publicly humiliated was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and completely comfortable with her own company. Matthew had thought he was trading up when he chose Sandra over me, pursuing youth and excitement over stability and commitment. Instead, he traded everything that actually mattered: his career, his reputation, his freedom, his family relationships, his financial security for temporary gratification that had cost him his entire future. I'd gained something far more valuable than any settlement or vindication. I'd rediscovered my own strength, my ability to trust my instincts, and my right to expect honesty and respect in all my relationships. The months of self-doubt and confusion had been replaced by clarity and confidence that would serve me well in whatever came next. Standing in the courthouse parking lot after Matthew's sentencing, breathing the fresh spring air as a completely free woman, I realized this wasn't an ending, it was the beginning of a life built on authenticity rather than appearances, honesty rather than convenience, and self-respect rather than social expectations. Justice had been served completely, and my new beginning could finally start. If this story of justice and revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Ashley revealed Sandra's true identity at that Christmas party, watching Matthew's world crumble in real time. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories of women taking back control. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.